My husband's parents sold their beach house and announced they're moving into our guest room indefinitely. When I objected, he said, "Stop being selfish for once." For weeks later, their screams from the guest room made the neighbors call 911. My name is Marin. I'm 44, a pediatric nurse, and I live, or lived, depending on how you want to look at it, in Charleston, South Carolina, with my husband of 9 years, Ellis. We were a pretty average couple. We met through mutual friends, built a life that was more about routine than romance, and filled the quiet gaps with work, bills, dinner, and occasional weekends by the coast. Ellis wasn't a bad man. But he was the kind of person who needed structure. Predictable, maybe too much. Reliable to a fault, until that reliability meant he expected me to bend so everything else stayed still. The house we lived in belonged to me. I inherited it from my aunt years ago, a sunny 2-story just outside of Folly Beach. I kept it tidy, quiet, peaceful. That home was my sanctuary. I liked things a certain way, and Ellis was okay with that. Until he wasn't. The morning everything started to unravel was a Monday. I remember because I had just come off a night shift, and all I wanted was breakfast and maybe an hour of silence before the world demanded something from me. I was spreading almond butter on toast when Ellis walked in, all calm and composed like it was just another day. "They sold the beach house," he said, without looking up from his phone. Just that. Like he was talking about someone else's life. I froze mid-spread. Who did? My parents. The market's good right now. They found buyers last week. I blinked at him. Okay, where are they going? He said it so casually it didn't even register at first. They'll stay here for a while. Just until they find something smaller. I put the blade down. They're moving in? Temporarily. How long is temporarily? Ellis didn't even flinch. Indefinitely. That word felt like a punch to the stomach. I looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Are you serious? You didn't think to talk to me first? They're my parents, Marin. This is my house. They've had a hard year. They need support. You always talk about family values, this is what that means. And then he said it. The thing that broke something in me. Stop being selfish for once. Martha and Jerome arrived the next Monday. I should have taken that as a sign. Their ability to uproot their entire lives with less than a week's notice meant this wasn't a sudden decision. It had been in the works. Planned. And Ellis hadn't said a word until the last minute. They pulled up in a sleek black SUV like they were coming for a weekend at a resort. Martha stepped out in pearls and sandals, hair perfectly set like she'd just left a salon. Jerome followed with that stiff-backed posture of a man who'd spent a lifetime in courtrooms. The moment they stepped inside, it stopped feeling like home. The first few days, they pretended to be polite. Martha made passive-aggressive comments about the kitchen layout, the way I folded towels, even the tea I drank. Jerome decided the pantry was inefficient and took it upon himself to reorganize it. I came home from work one night to find our dry goods alphabetized. They treated the house like a temporary hotel, but with the authority of people who thought they owned it. When I asked them to let me know before rearranging things, Martha smiled and said, "We're all family now. We should feel comfortable." But it wasn't comfort. It was invasion. Quiet and constant. I tried to talk to Ellis about it. He always brushed it off. They're old, they're set in their ways. Just give them time. As if I needed to adjust. As if I was the one being unreasonable. I started retreating more and more. Spent my evenings upstairs in the home office with the door closed, pretending I had paperwork. Sometimes I stayed late at work just to avoid dinner. But the tipping point came about 3 weeks in. Martha decided to host a bridge night. Not only did she not ask me, she rearranged the living room, moved my books, took down my framed photos, and replaced them with some of her own. I walked in that evening and stared at a stranger's version of my house. I snapped. I told Ellis I wanted them out. His response? Jesus, Marin. Why do you have to make everything so hard? I told him I needed space, that he was choosing his parents over me. He shrugged and said, "You've been distant anyway." It was like talking to a wall. The night everything changed, I was reading upstairs. It was almost 11 when I heard the first sound. A thud. Then a loud bang. Then screaming. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was the TV. But it didn't stop. The screaming kept going, panicked, high-pitched, guttural. It was Martha. I ran downstairs. The hallway lights were still off. The guest room door was open, and the sound was coming from inside. Martha was on the floor, crying hysterically. Jerome was collapsed on the bed, his face red and twisted. There was red wine spilled all over the carpet. A glass shattered. The room looked like a war zone. I backed away, heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and was about to dial 911 when I saw our next-door neighbor, Maureen, already sprinting over. She must have heard it through the walls. Sirens arrived less than 10 minutes later. Paramedics carried Jerome out on a stretcher. He was semi-conscious, muttering nonsense. Martha was shaking so badly she couldn't speak. Ellis stood in the hallway, pale, watching it all unfold like he wasn't part of it. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't even move. I barely slept that night. The house, usually too quiet, now felt haunted. The guest room door was still wide open. I stood there for a while just staring into the wreckage, shards of glass in the rug, the red stain creeping into the floorboards. One of Jerome's slippers was turned on its side near the doorway, like he'd struggled to stay upright. Ellis didn't say much when the paramedics left. I asked if he was going to the hospital. He just shook his head, said the doctors would call if anything serious happened. Then he went upstairs, like it was any other night. Like his father hadn't just collapsed and his mother hadn't screamed like she was being assassinated. I stayed downstairs. I couldn't sit. Couldn't lie down. Just paced, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned, putting things back in order, whatever I could to pretend something made sense. The next day, I got the call. From the hospital. Not Ellis. Not Martha. A social worker. Jerome, it turned out, was in the early stages of dementia. But not the slow, forget-your-keys kind. The kind that sometimes snaps like a switch, paranoia, aggression, sudden confusion. What happened the night before wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a fall or a seizure. He'd had an episode. He thought Martha was someone else. Started yelling at her, accusing her of poisoning him. According to the nurse, he tried to grab a lamp and throw it at her, missed, then collapsed. That was when Martha finally broke. The real story came out piece by piece. She'd been managing his episodes quietly for months. Maybe longer. She'd been hiding it from everyone, even Ellis. Apparently, she'd been giving Jerome some over-the-counter sleep aids and mixing them with herbal supplements to keep him calm. And wine. Lots of wine. She didn't want to ruin his dignity, the social worker said. She thought she could control it. Until she couldn't. I didn't know what to say. I hung up the phone and sat in my car outside the hospital for almost an hour, trying to figure out who I was even supposed to be in this situation. Wife? Bystander? Enemy? When I came home that afternoon, the house was still quiet. Ellis was sitting at the dining table. Staring at nothing. The sun cast long shadows through the curtains. He looked older somehow, like all the weight of everything had finally landed on him. They called, I said softly. Did they talk to you? He nodded. They think he's going to need full-time care. I waited for him to say more, to apologize maybe, to acknowledge how everything had spiraled from a lack of honesty. But all he said was, she didn't tell me. All this time, she didn't say anything. I sat across from him. You didn't ask. He didn't argue. The days that followed were blurry. Martha was kept at the hospital for a while for psychiatric evaluation. They said she had something called caregiver burnout, something I'd learned about in nursing school but had never seen up close like this. She wasn't dangerous, they said. Just exhausted. They sent her to a residential facility in Bluffton. Somewhere quiet. Private. One of those places with yoga and support groups and visiting therapy dogs. Jerome was placed in a memory care unit not far from her, but they weren't allowed to live together. Not until the doctors said it was safe. And through all of that, Ellis barely looked at me. I asked him once, during dinner, why didn't you tell me they were struggling? He stirred his pasta like it bored him. Because I didn't know. And if I did, I probably wouldn't have told you anyway. You wouldn't have wanted to deal with it. I stared at him. So it's my fault you didn't trust me? He didn't answer. A week passed. Then another. The house was quiet again, but not in the way I liked. It was heavy now. Every room felt full of things left unsaid. I started sleeping in the guest room, not because I had to, but because it felt like the only honest thing to do. That room had seen the truth of this family, the rawness, the rot we'd all been pretending wasn't there. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of the bed and look at the stain on the carpet. I hadn't cleaned it. Couldn't bring myself to. It reminded me that silence doesn't make things safe. Pretending doesn't make things okay. One morning, I woke up to find Ellis gone. No note. Just his car missing and his phone off. He came back later that evening with takeout and a quiet voice. Said he'd visited his mother. Said she was different, calmer. Said she asked about me. She's sorry, he said. She didn't mean for any of this to happen. I nodded but didn't respond. I couldn't get angry anymore. The anger had turned into something else. Something colder. We existed like that for a while. Two people sharing a house but not a life. He spent most of his time in his home office. I spent mine in the garden, or at work, or with my friend Priya, who started asking more and more often if I was okay. The truth was, I wasn't sure. I kept thinking about what Ellis said that day in the kitchen. Stop being selfish for once. It echoed in my head every time I looked at the empty guest room, every time I tiptoed through my own house, every time I caught myself wondering if I should have just gone along with it from the beginning. But then I'd remember the silence. The secrets. The way he never once asked how I was handling any of it. And slowly, the guilt started to fade. 2 more weeks passed. Maybe 3. I stopped counting the days. The air in the house was thick with avoidance. We coexisted like roommates who didn't like each other very much. I'd wake early, leave for the hospital before Ellis even came down for coffee. Come home late, sit in the garden with a glass of wine until the stars came out. I think he appreciated the distance, or maybe he was just relieved not to talk. Sometimes he'd update me on his parents. Short sentences, no emotion. Mom's doing better. Dad settled into the new place. The facility has a therapist who specializes in trauma cases. He never mentioned how he felt. Never asked how I felt. It was all logistics. Transactions. And it wasn't just what he wasn't saying, it was what he hadn't done all along. No apology. No reflection. No recognition of what he dragged into our home like it was just another piece of furniture. But I couldn't shake the images in my head, Martha on the floor sobbing, Jerome lashing out, the wine stain that still hadn't fully come out of the carpet no matter how many times I tried. I had moments, in between shifts, in between folding laundry or reheating leftovers, where I thought, maybe I was selfish. Maybe I should have known. Maybe I should have said yes sooner. Maybe I wasn't supportive enough. But those thoughts didn't last long anymore. Because I'd remember how much silence had been passed off as sacrifice in that house. How many times I was expected to make space for people who never asked if they were intruding. How Ellis had looked right through me when I said I didn't feel okay. The worst part wasn't even what happened in the guest room that night. It was what happened after. Nothing. Just more silence. One night, I came home and the table was set. Candles. My favorite Thai takeout. A bottle of red opened and breathing. Ellis sat there, like it was a normal evening. Like we weren't living in the ruins of something unspoken. I stood in the doorway, surprised. "What's this?" "I thought we could eat together," he said. "We haven't, in a while." I didn't move. "That's not really the problem, Ellis." He sighed. "I know. I've been thinking." I crossed my arms. "Yeah? You were right. About a lot of things." It was the first time he'd said that. It didn't feel satisfying. It just felt late. He kept talking. Something about denial. About pressure. About how he thought bringing his parents here would fix everything, save face, avoid embarrassment, delay the inevitable. How he genuinely didn't know about Jerome's condition, and when he did suspect something, he panicked. Didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to talk to me about it. So, he didn't. I listened. I didn't interrupt. But when he finished, I just said, "Okay." Not forgiveness. Not a bridge back to anything. Just okay. We ate in silence. The next day, I found an envelope on the counter. Inside, a printed list of local therapists, 2 appointment cards, and a handwritten note in Ellis's all-caps printing, "I made one for me. And one if you want to go together." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. There had been so many versions of this life I thought I'd signed up for. Quiet stability. Mutual respect. A home that was safe, shared, warm. I didn't expect constant passion or fairy tale endings. But I expected honesty. I expected partnership. What I got instead was someone who let things rot under the surface until it exploded in the middle of my sanctuary. Still, part of me wondered if this late attempt to fix things, meant anything. If the fact that he was finally acknowledging reality counted for something. If I should try to rebuild what cracked. But another part of me, the deeper, quieter voice I'd ignored for years, said, it shouldn't have taken this much to get here. That same voice had started whispering other things lately, too. About how peaceful it felt sleeping alone. About how I liked the stillness in the house when no one else was in it. About how I'd stopped walking on eggshells the moment his parents left and hadn't missed them for a second. The morning after that dinner, I called the number on the therapy card. Not the one for couples counseling. The other one. The solo one. Ellis didn't ask which I picked. Maybe he knew. The next time we visited Martha, she hugged me. Her arms felt smaller than I remembered. "Frilier." She looked at me and said, "You were never the problem. I should have told you what was going on." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were glassy. I nodded, but I didn't say, "I know." Because I hadn't always known. I'd doubted myself too many times in this process. Let guilt cloud what should have been clear. On the way back from Bluffton, Ellis asked if I wanted to stop at the marina for lunch. I said no. We drove the rest of the way in silence. He didn't try again. A week later, I got home from work and the guest room door was closed. That alone made me stop. It had been open for weeks, ever since that night. I'd left it that way on purpose, let the air circulate, let the memory settle. It was symbolic, in a way. A reminder. Now it was shut. I hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, the room was different. The wine-stained carpet had been replaced. A new area rug, soft blue and ivory, covered the floor. The bedding had been changed, crisp white with delicate pale green accents. A diffuser sat on the nightstand, gently steaming the scent of lavender through the air. It was an apology. Ellis must have done it quietly, sometime that day, maybe even over the weekend. I hadn't noticed. I hadn't asked. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just staring. Part of me wanted to be moved. Part of me was moved. But it also felt like someone patching a hole in the drywall after the flood had already destroyed the foundation. Too late. Too shallow. That evening, I asked him about it. I wanted to give you back the room, he said. I know it became something else. I just thought maybe it could feel like yours again. It was the right thing to say. It really was. But that voice in my head had grown louder since therapy started. Clearer. I nodded. Thank you. It's nice. He looked relieved, and we left it at that. But inside, I wasn't feeling relief. I was feeling tired. Tired of fixing things after they broke, tired of explaining how they got broken in the first place. In therapy, I'd started talking about what home meant to me. How I'd grown up with chaos, yelling, slamming doors, people walking out and back in without warning. I'd craved stillness my whole life. Peace. Predictability. That house wasn't just a place I lived, it was the first place I'd ever felt safe. Letting Ellis bring his parents into it, without talking to me, without preparing me, without even asking, it wasn't just inconsiderate. It was a violation of that safety. I told the therapist that. I said it out loud. And she nodded like it made perfect sense, because it did. It finally did. Ellis didn't know that part. I hadn't told him yet. About a week later, I got a call from Martha. She was in better spirits. Said the group therapy was helping. That she was starting to sleep again. That the other women at the facility made her laugh. I didn't realize how lonely I was, she said, voice low and warm. I thought I was doing the right thing by handling it all alone. But I wasn't handling it at all. We talked longer than we ever had, just the two of us. No Ellis, no forced politeness. Then, right before we hung up, she said something that hit me sideways. You have every right to protect your peace, Marin. Even from us. I didn't know how to respond, so I just whispered, thank you. It stayed with me for days. A few nights after that, Ellis brought up therapy. You've been going, he said, not accusing, just stating. How's it been? Hard, I admitted. Good. But hard. He nodded. I've been going too. Separate one. The guy gave me homework, said I should start asking questions I'm scared to hear the answers to. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? He was quiet for a moment. Then, are you still in this? With me, I mean. I exhaled. That question, finally spoken, hung in the air like fog. Dense and thick and slow to move. I don't know, I said. There was no rage. No tears. Just honesty. I'm not trying to punish you, I added. I'm just really tired. And I don't know if I want to rebuild something that never felt safe when it mattered most. Ellis looked down, hands folded. That's fair. And to his credit, he didn't push. He didn't launch into a speech. He just sat there, quiet and present, as if he finally understood that sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. Around this time, Priya invited me to spend a weekend in Asheville. A wellness retreat thing, mostly yoga and hiking and overpriced smoothies. Normally, I'd roll my eyes and say no. But this time, I said yes. I needed air. Distance. Something outside my zip code to remember what it felt like to breathe freely. Ellis didn't ask questions when I packed a small suitcase and said I'd be gone 3 nights. Take what you need, he said. And I did. That weekend felt like a balm. Mountain air, stars I couldn't see from my backyard, hours of silence without tension. Priya didn't press me with questions. She just handed me herbal tea and played soft piano music and let me talk only when I felt like it. On the second morning, I woke up early, stepped outside barefoot onto the porch, and watched the sun spill over the ridges. And I realized something. I didn't miss Ellis. Not in the painful, hollow way you miss someone when you know you're drifting apart. But in the relieved way. The way you feel when a headache that's been there so long you forgot it was there finally fades, and you think, oh. So this is what clarity feels like. When I got home, Ellis was in the kitchen. He didn't rush to me. Didn't kiss me or ask how it went. He just handed me a cup of tea and said, "You look like you slept for a year." I laughed, quietly. Felt like it. He sat across from me. We drank in silence. And for once, it didn't feel heavy. He didn't ask what decision I'd made. And I didn't offer one. Because the truth was, I wasn't done deciding. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't trying to fix something out of guilt. I wasn't prioritizing comfort over truth. Not anymore. The guest room stayed empty. The house stayed quiet. But this time, it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like a pause. 3 weeks after the retreat, I was sitting in the garden, pruning the lavender, when Ellis came outside. He'd barely been around all morning, and when he sat beside me on the porch steps, I knew he had something to say. He didn't waste time. "Mom and Dad are putting me as power of attorney," he said. "There's a lot to manage now, between her accounts and his care." I nodded. "Makes sense." Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Do you want me to move out?" It was the first time he didn't act like this was just a bump we'd ride over. It was the first time he didn't hide behind logistics, or therapy lingo, or awkward half-fixes. I took a deep breath and set down the shears. "Yes," I said, calm and clear. "I do." He nodded. No resistance. No bitterness. Just a long pause before he said, "Okay." We didn't cry. There was no dramatic breakdown. Just two people who had quietly realized that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for each other is walk away. He was gone within a week. No fight over the house, it was mine, legally and emotionally. No war over assets, we had no kids, no joint business. Just a few boxes, some redirected mail, and silence. But that wasn't the ending. Not quite. Martha called again about 2 weeks after he moved out. She wanted to meet for lunch. She sounded different. Lighter, maybe even chipper. I was curious, so I agreed. We met at a quiet spot in Mount Pleasant, outdoor patio, iced tea, southern heat humming in the air. She didn't mince words. "I know what happened to my son," she said after we ordered. "And I know what he did to you, even if he doesn't." I was startled. "He's not a bad person, Martha." "No," she agreed. "Just a weak one." And I spent a long time enabling that. I thought it was protecting him. Turns out, I was protecting him from consequences. From growing up. From being a husband. She stirred her tea with a slow, steady hand. "I wanted to thank you, actually." That threw me. For what? For not completely destroying him. You could have. I've been watching him flail since you left, and honestly, it's the best thing that ever happened to him. I didn't know what to say to that. But then came the part one hadn't seen coming. "I spoke to a lawyer," she said. "A different one than the family guy Ellis used. I'm making some changes to my estate." "Martha," she waved me off. "Don't worry, it's not for you. I'm not about to play fairy godmother. But I did want you to know, I'm putting a clause in that restricts access to my trust. If Ellis is still not in therapy or demonstrating any kind of stability, he doesn't get a dime." I blinked. "You're serious?" "As a stroke," she said, smiling. "And Jerome? He wouldn't want his money to go to a son who treated his marriage like a chore. Trust me. I knew that man better than anyone." I took a long sip of my tea. I didn't smile. Not right away. But I felt it start, deep in my chest. A month after that, I had the guest room professionally redone. Not just repainted or recarpeted, I hired a designer. The walls went soft sage, the shelves were rebuilt in warm oak, and the bedding? Rich, luxurious linen. I bought art from a local gallery. I hung a stained glass suncatcher in the window that caught the afternoon light and painted rainbows across the floor. The final touch? A new doorknob. I had the locks changed on that door, not because I feared anyone would come back, but because I wanted to reclaim it completely. That room would never again be a monument to silence, secrets, or second chances squandered. It became my reading room. My writing space. A sanctuary inside a sanctuary. And Ellis? Word got around, like it always does in Charleston. He moved into a small condo near Daniel Island. Still working, still figuring things out. We exchanged the occasional email, polite, dry, mostly about mail that still showed up at the house. But here's the part that makes me smirk every time. Turns out, the trust Martha locked down? He didn't believe her. Thought it was just a bluff. So he made a few bold purchases, new car, some investment in a startup run by a guy he met at a golf tournament. He even quit his job briefly to explore entrepreneurship. And then the paperwork came. No access. Not a cent. Conditional terms had kicked in. Everything locked tight behind evaluations, milestones, reports. He was furious. He emailed me, half begging, half blaming, "She wouldn't have done this if it weren't for you." I didn't reply. Because he was wrong. She didn't do it because of me. She did it because she finally saw him. And that was the revenge, in the end, not fire or fury or ruin. Just the simple, quiet weight of truth finally pressing down where it belonged. The house is mine. The quiet is mine. My peace, reclaimed. And sometimes, when the afternoon sun hits that suncatcher just right, I remember how close I came to giving it all up, for politeness, for obligation, for someone else's comfort. Never again.